we're very excited to share with you the story of two remarkable people, Stefania Podgorska and Helena Podgorska. These two young Polish Catholic girls took in 13 people and hid them in an attic for nearly 2 years in Nazi-occupied Przemyśl, Poland. The 13 people happened to be of the Jewish faith, and Stefania and Helena were Catholic. All 13 survived, and it's really truly an honor for us because Stefania was our mother. Stefania was raised in a small town in southeastern Poland. Her family lived on a farm, and Stefania wasn't really much for the farm life. She was more of a city girl. So the farm life didn't really agree with her, and she wanted to move to the big city. Like a lot of kids, Stefania had her formal name or given name was Stefania, but she had a number of nicknames. Her name was shortened to Stefusha, Stefa, Fusha. She actually really liked Fusha, and that's a name that stuck with her throughout her life. In America, American people had a challenge saying Fusha, so they would shorten her name to Steffi. So her name was Steffi in America, and a lot of her friends, including us, her kids, would know her as Fusha. She convinced her mom to allow her to move to the big city, the city of Przemyśl, which also is in southeastern Poland. Her sister had been living there, and she convinced her mom that she would be able to go and live there. She loved the hustle and bustle of the big city, the lights, the energy, the sound. It was like magic for her. She really enjoyed it. She ended up getting a job at a little grocery store, what would be like a mini mart here in America. They sold a variety of different things. They sold food products, they sold newspapers, they sold a whole bunch of different things. The store was owned by the Diamant family, Mr. and Mrs. Diamant, and their 5 children. Everything was going really well with Fusha and the Diamants, and Fusha was attractive. She was very personable. She had a very sharp wit, and she actually was pretty flirtatious. All of that was really good for business. The Diamants and Fusha really got along well. The Diamants were Jewish, and again, Stefania Fusha, she was Catholic, but that didn't really make much of a difference. Everything was really going nicely for them until the war started in 1939. And then the Nazis came in. And of course, once the Nazis come in, one of the first things that they want to do is identify and catalog all the people that were living there, particularly identifying Jews. This is the identification card of Max Diamant, one of the Diamant family, a second oldest brother. As you can see, he's clearly identified as a Jude, as a Jew. Once all the Jews are identified and cataloged, then they have to be corralled someplace where they can be watched. So they were moved into the ghetto. The Diamant families moved into the ghetto. The main entrance to the ghetto was on Kopernika Street, Ulica Kopernika. There was a wall that surrounded this district, and there would have been a gate that was right here at the front of the entrance of this street. And Christina, would you like to talk a little bit about the ghetto?
My mother would sneak in and out of the ghetto to help the Diamant family. So the Diamant family, especially my grandmother, was very kind to my mother. That's what she always would say, is that they were very kind to her. And my grandmother actually told her that you're like another daughter to me. So when they ended up having to go to the ghetto, my mom was, she was bonded, she was attached to them. So what she used to do was try to bring them some food. Because in the beginning, people were able to leave the ghetto and go to work. I have several identifications that my father has where they were work permits, and also of my uncle. So they were able to go out and work. They just had an identification card that said that they were Jewish. But then as time went on, it started getting more and more strict. And, they were taking people to the camps and things like that. So then it became harder and they weren't able to leave. At that point, they were starting to try to starve people. So there were soldiers and policemen guarding the gates, not the gates, but the perimeters. But my mother found a way to sneak in. It was actually my dad that told her. So there were cement posts and barbed wire. But around the back, there was one section where near the ground, there were some wooden boards. And then on top of that was barbed wire going all the way up. And some of the people, I guess a couple of guys that were in the ghetto, they kind of tampered with one of the boards a little bit. And this was flush with the ground so that you can kind of lift it up a little bit and crawl out, and then it would fall back down. So not only did my mother sneak in, but people were sneaking out, going back and forth, including my father. But you had to be little. So it was either, my father was a little guy. So it was either someone that was physically small, or like my mother, who was a girl, a young woman. So the adults, the bigger people couldn't fit through there. And basically they came up with a system, the people in the ghetto, because they had Polish policemen patrolling and guarding, but also soldiers. And they would walk the perimeter of the ghetto. So because they were very precise, and we all know about how precise and time-wise the Germans were, one of them would go around the corner, and then there was a couple of minutes before the next one came around the corner. So during that couple of minutes, when one left before the other one came down around the corner, there was nobody there. So she would put on an armband with a Jewish star, lift that board up, and crawl on her stomach into the ghetto. And mostly all she could smuggle in was like a loaf of bread and some potatoes. There wasn't food available because this was a wartime and food wasn't available. But the people were starving, and at least she was able to give them some bread and some potatoes. And they were very grateful to her. They were very grateful and appreciative. They would give her like a piece of jewelry, and she would go try to sell that for some food. But also, it wasn't just the Diamant family. There were other people too that knew what she was doing, and they would beg her, please, please, here's a brooch, here's a bracelet, here's a necklace, please, can you sell this for a loaf of bread? So that's what she would do. But there was another component to that as well, because it was also a big middle finger to the Germans, because my mother came from a military family. So it wasn't by chance that she was very courageous. Her father, my grandfather, was in the military. Our great-grandfather was in the military. And pretty much you can trace my mother's heritage back to the Knights, to the Hussars. And those were the fighting knights of Poland. So she, it was bred into her. So she was feisty, she was patriotic, and her sneaking in and out of the ghetto wasn't just about Jewish people, but it was also kind of like, hey, I'm right under your nose, look what I'm doing. It was reckless, but she was young, and that was her attitude. So there was more than one component, because Poland was her country that was invaded by an army, and she was resentful of that. She would always call them słaby, which means cockroach in Polish, and that's what Polish people refer to the Germans as, because they wore all the black uniforms, so they were like a bunch of roaches. And she wasn't hateful, but she had contempt for them. She had contempt. So that was that was my mother in the ghetto.
And as Christina said, she was compassionate to the Diamant family because they
were kind to her.
They were kind to her. They really enjoyed each other. They loved each other. So much so that they asked Fusha to live in their apartment with them. She didn't have a place to live. So once they were in the ghetto, Fusha's living in their apartment with her 8-year-old sister, Helena. And on November 18th, 1942, is when the Nazis were doing a second clearing of the ghetto. And what does that mean? That means the Jews that were living in the ghetto were being rounded up and put onto trains and moved off to concentration or relocation camps. We now know that those trains went to Belzec. And Belzec was not a concentration camp. It wasn't a work camp. There were no barracks. People got off the trains and went straight to a gas chamber. And that's where people were heading on November 18th, 1942. So that night, there's a knock on the door. And it's this guy, Max Diamant. He was on one of the trains. He shows up all bruised and bloody, and he tells his story. And it would be an honor for us if he could tell you his story.
And I remember those 4 barbed wires. And I came here, and I had in my pocket pliers, flat pliers, and I tried to break the barbed wires. I worked for a while, and I broke all 4 wires. I bent them, and I tried to jump with my head forward to the window. When I was forward, I saw the running trucks, gravels, and everything, and I thought for a while, this is not right, because this will suck me inside, it will cut me in pieces. So I said, please, take me back, take me back. They pulled me back inside. I said I have to go with my leg forward. And they helped me to go with my leg forward. And I was hanging, and when the train was taking a curve, I jumped forward.
It's absolutely incredible. And on the train, along with him was his older brother Hyman and one of his cousins. So Max came and he asked if he could just stay one night. Fusha, Helena, and Max, they decided that Max would stay longer. After a while, they decided that there was one more of the Diamant family left, Max's brother. They wanted to get him out of the ghetto and try to save him along with his fiancée, which they did. So now there are 5 people living in this apartment, 3 Jewish people, 2 Catholic girls, and the penalty for harboring and helping a Jewish person at the time literally was death. It was a very difficult situation, but the apartment was not big enough for all of them. So Fusha had to go and find a larger place. She went out looking, and of course there were a lot of bombed out buildings and destroyed buildings. And she ran into a couple of ladies and she asked them if they knew of any place that was available for rent. And they said, yeah, go to Tatarska Street, Ulica Tatarska, Tatarska number 3.
Was primitive, was no light, was no water inside, the toilet was outside, but for this my deadly business, that was really like a dream.
So this is Tatarska Street. This is the way it looked not too long ago. The front of the house was occupied, and what Fusha was pointing out in her video was the back side of the house. And you could see there's a pump for water. There was no running water in the house. There was no electricity in the house, but what there was an attic. And up here, take note of this little window right up there, because the attic would be a perfect place for people to hide. This is a picture of Fusha in the attic nearly 40 years after the war ended. My sister and I traveled back to Przemyśl with my mom, and this was the first time she'd been there in nearly 40 years. You can see the look on her face. It's almost like she's seeing ghosts. So if you notice, that's me in the background. I'm kneeling down. I think my sister took this picture, and I'm nearly 6 feet tall, or I am 6 feet tall. So when I stand up, I was just about to the top of the rafters, top of the roof. And in this space, this attic area is where people could hide. The Max and his brother and fiance could hide. But after a while, they wanted to bring in more people. So, but how could you hide people in an attic? It's open. So Max had an idea. Well, what if Helena and Fusha could bring some wood from some of the blown out buildings, and maybe he could build a little partition? So they did. They built a wooden partition that made it look like the attic ended. If you look on this wall right here, you can see a mark and some exposed wood where the partition was built, and it rested up against the wall, went up, came down along this rafter, and down along this brick wall. And remember that window I pointed out to you in the previous slide? That's that window. And somebody would always look out that window into the courtyard to see if anyone was coming. So ultimately there were 13 people that were living in this attic. and living in this area. But remember, there's no running water in this place. So how do people go to the bathroom? Well, the only option there was a bucket. And the bucket was outside of that little bunker area, that closed area. And people would just go to the bathroom as they needed to. But of course, then that bucket needed to be cleared, disposed of. So somebody had to take it out to the outhouses and back. And that typically fell on little Helena and Fusha to clear out. Now, when I say take it downstairs, there wasn't a staircase going down from the attic. There was a ladder, and it was a nearly vertical ladder. So you had to take that, climb down the ladder into the outhouse, clean it out, bring it back. Now, for nearly 18 months to 2 years, there were people that were crammed in this spot. They could go out at times, but they were there in a summer and a winter, a summer, and people weren't able to wash all that often. So you can just kind of imagine what that must have been like. Now, more people were going to come, but by this time, the ghetto was really locked down, and nobody could get in or out. And it was posted that anybody actually even communicating with somebody across the fence could face death. So how to get information, how to pass a note back into the ghetto that where they're supposed to go? Well, Helena was a kid, and she used to play around there, and nobody would pay attention to her. So she suggested that she could go. She could pass the note. So she ended up going. And she ran into such a challenging situation over there. And again, it's my honor, our honor, to let you hear Helena's story. It's in Polish, but it's subtitled in English.
Miałam list dostarczyć do getta. To było w ten sposób, że tu po tej stronie było getto, a po tej stronie mieszkali Polacy. Ja jako dziecko, to Boże, widziałam, że tu w oknie ma się pokazać z getta. Ja mam mu dać list, wziąć ten list. I nie wiedziałam, że dalej był gestapowiec. A jeszcze w bramach byli Polacy. I proszę sobie wyobrazić, że dał mi znać, że on jest ten list, więc ja podskoczyłam, dałam list, wzięłam list i ta Polka w bramie do gestapowca, że ja mam kontakt, list i ten gestapowiec przyszedł, złapał mnie, zaczął mnie bić i chciał mnie, wie pani, co ja robię? Nie wiem, jak to się stało. Ja się broniłam, ale jak ja małe dziecko się mogę, jak to gestapowiec i jak ja mogę. Wzięła mnie w nogę, go ugryzła. Tu, wie pani, jak to się stało, nie wiem. Kto mi podpowie, nie wiem. Ugryzłam go w nogę. Ale musiałam go dobrze ugryźć, bo on mnie puścił i złapał się za tą nogę. To ja w tym czasie uciekłam. Jak uciekłam, to wracałam z powrotem, płakałam. Pamiętam, jak płakałam i miałam ten list. Prawda? I teraz zastanawiałam się, że przecież on będzie mnie gonił. To ja zaczęłam ten list jeść. Połykać, żeby nie było żadnego dowodu. To było dla mnie potworny szok. Przyszłam do domu, jak siostrze opowiadałam i tym, tak płakałam. No ale co mogli zrobić? Nic. Na drugi dzień idź zrób zakupy, idź to i tak. I powoli za tych 13 Żydów przyszło.
Can you imagine? I mean, here's this kid, a girl, and she's picked up by, I mean, today it would be a police officer, but a really mean police officer. He was a SS man or a Gestapo guy. And she bit him on the leg. And then she ate the note with the address because she knew if they got the note, they were all gone for. I mean, it's mind-boggling. It is absolutely mind-boggling. Later on, as the war was not coming to an end, but the Germans were starting to retreat, there was a military hospital that was built across the street from Tatarska 3. And this is a picture showing Tatarska 3 on the left. And this building over here was either a school or a municipal building, and that's what the Germans army took over as a hospital. And then one day, there was a knock on the door on Tatarska 3, and I'd like Fusha to share that story with you.
One day, came to me 2 SS men, and they said to me, they gave me only 2 hours to move out of my apartment. And I asked why. They said, because they opened the military hospital across my home, and they needed apartments for their personality, for themselves. Around that was family, and he said that we are only 2 girls, so we can go out. And they gave me 2 hours.
And you know all these people are in your attic.
No, she was holding us.
So what did you do?
Wait a minute.
Wait. Okay.
So these SS men said, if they will come with 2 hours and I will be still at home, they will kill me and my sister. I said, all right. I didn't have choice. When they left, I went to the attic. I told my people what happened. 2 hours they gave me to move out my apartment. So all 13 came to me, embraced me around, and they said, listen, Steffi, you have to run away. Take your little sister. You cannot help us anymore, but save yourself and your sister. We probably have to die. There's no choice, but you not have to. You cannot help us anymore. Take your sister and go. Run away. I said, first of all, I will run to the city and ask maybe will be some apartment. And I ran and I look around and here and there, and in 2 hours you cannot find apartment.
Right.
I can go to my friends for a few days before later I can find.
But you can't take 13
But
people.
13 people.
Right.
I just also, I couldn't leave them. So was 15 minutes left. I came home and I told them, no apartment. And they all still came around me. They said, run away, you have still 10 minutes. Run away. Don't stay, you not have to die with us. Run away. And some of the cried was 3 children, and they looked at me and they touched me and they hold me. They didn't say nothing, but they squeezed me. And I look on these 13 people, and I felt inside I cannot leave them.
So what
They're
happened?
People.
What happened?
And I told them, I will not leave you. And they were like a shock. I said, go on the attic, go to your bunker and stay quiet. We will see what will be. I will not leave you.
So when the SS men came back, what happened?
SS man came back exactly 2 minutes, and they said, that's all right that I am not moved, because they will take only 1 room, and in the other room I can stay with my sister.
Miracle.
That's a miracle. That is a miracle.
That's just, it's mind-boggling, but it gives you an idea of Fusha's personality too. Not even Oprah can move her along. She told Oprah, wait a minute, let me finish. Fusha would do things on her schedule, and it didn't matter what somebody told her. You know, and as amazing as that story is, Fusha's version, we also have Helena's version because she was also there. And I'd like to share that with you, her perspective.
Byłam zaoferowana tylko tym wynieść kubeł z odpadami, przynieść wodę ze studni. Wszystko musiałam nosić i ja to wszystko musiałam robić. Ja nie mogłam, nie pozwolano mi bawić się z dziećmi na podwórko, żebym przypadkiem nie zdradziła. Nie. No to jak to dziecko. Także ja byłam odizolowana. Nie miałam żadnego towarzystwa, nie miałam żadnych zabaw, nie miałam nic, tylko idź, przynieś, podaj, wynieś, kup. I całkiem po prostu. Siostra była bardzo religijna, co nas bardzo ratowało. To znaczy, jak Niemcy zaczęli się cofać, to tam była szkoła niedaleko naszego budynku. To Niemcy zrobili tam szpital w tej szkole. No i trzeba było mieć, że tak powiem, mieszkanie dla pielęgniarek, dla tego wszystkiego. No to co? Przyszło do siostry, żebyśmy się wyprowadzili. No teraz wyprowadź się z 13 do tego, no to wszyscy zginiemy. I pamiętam jak dzisiaj, proszę pani, siostra się tak modliła. I we śnie ukazała się Matka Boska siostrze i powiedziała, że wszystko się dobrze ułoży, żeby się nie denerwować. I siostra jak się przebudziła, to rano opowiadała o tym. Powiedziała, jak to wygląda. Proszę sobie wyobrazić, że później przyszedł Niemiec i powiedział, że żebyśmy zostały, że to przyjdą tylko 2 pielęgniarki. Żebyśmy się nie wyprowadzały z tego mieszkania. I teraz proszę sobie wyobrazić, jak to jest. Tu jest kuchnia, to znaczy tu jest wejście, tu jest kuchnia. Tu są drzwi, wchodzi się do pokoju, gdzie myśmy spały. To wszystko. I to są drugie drzwi do drugiego pokoju. I teraz te 2 pielęgniarki zajęły ten ostatni pokój. Zawsze na noc do niej przychodzili Niemcy. Więc może sobie pani wyobrazić, jaka to była tragedia. A tu na strychu 13 ludzi. Trzeba jedzenie, trzeba kuby wynieść, trzeba wodę, to wszystko. Język jest za ubogi na to, żeby wszystko, że tak powiem, powiedzieć. Nie da się.
It just boggles the mind, and one of the things that Helena says is that Fusha was religious. In the translation, it said she was pious. She had deep faith, and that faith helped carry her through. November 22nd, 1944, Max and Fusha were married. Max said, she gave me my life, and I owe her my life. And Fusha would say, he came for one night and stayed 59 years. So it worked out quite well. My sister was going to talk here, but since she's not here, I'll share the story with you. He became Joseph Burzminski. Why did he become Joseph Burzminski rather than Max Diamant? After the war, there were still people that had a lot of animosity towards Jewish people. They were being hunted still. And Max Diamant was a very Jewish name. And he had an incident, apparently, where he and his brother were arrested by what would be considered the local police, but it's dubious whether they actually were. And they were to be shot, of all things. And they managed to they managed to be freed because Fusha flagged down some Soviet soldiers that were there and told them that Max and his brother were arrested. So the Soviet soldiers went over to that what would have been a police station, or whatever it was that they were being held. And there were people there that had been shot recently, and Max and his brother were going to be shot. So the Soviet soldier held whoever those people were at gunpoint and freed Max and his brother. And so Max decided that he did not want to be visibly Jewish by name. So he bought the identity papers of a man named Joseph Burzminski. And Burzminski is a particularly Polish name. And that's how he became Joseph Burzminski. He was a dentist. They moved to Israel. And from Israel, they moved to Boston, where he had to go to dental school all over again because his diploma wasn't recognized in the United States. So after being an oral surgeon for so many years, he went to Tufts University in his late 40s, and he graduated at the age of 51 in 1966. Now, Joe, he was quite a character. Picture this happy-go-lucky guy. He had an ability to laugh. When things were really challenging or difficult, he would just chuckle and he would say, things could always be worse. Picture this guy who stood not 5 feet 2 inches tall in his bare feet. This happy-go-lucky guy, and sharing his life, giving us a lot of happiness and joy and laughter. I had moved to Los Angeles to seek my fame and fortune. And I ended up learning how to scuba dive, taking some scuba classes. And in that class, I met everybody, and there was this one German guy, this big, burly guy. And he had we got to be friends, and we would scuba dive together. Our girlfriends were both Filipino, so we connected on that, and we all were scuba diving together. And one evening, we were driving through the Fairfax district in Los Angeles. Now, for those of you who don't know Los Angeles, the Fairfax district is a particularly Jewish district. And it was in the evening, I don't remember what day it was in particular, but we were at a stop light, waiting for a couple of guys to cross the street. And they apparently were Orthodox Jews. They had their pesas and their hats, and they dress the way they dress. So we're watching them cross the street. And my friend Hans is driving. I'm in the passenger. And out of the blue, he says, my girlfriend won't let me burn them. I look at him and I said, what? He said, Adolf didn't finish the job. And I said to him, it's because of people like you that my father had 23 people in his family murdered? He said, oh my gosh, I'm sorry, you don't have a Jewish way about you. I said, a Jewish way about me? I was baptized and confirmed. I was raised Catholic. So needless to say, it wasn't a very pleasant ride home. So the next day, I called my father. He was in Boston, and I was fuming because I had internalized his story, the pain of losing his family. I knew my parents' story, but I really internalized his. And I thought to myself, if I ever run across somebody like that, I could be, I don't know what I could do. So I called my father and I told him the story, and he was silent. There was a silence for a moment. And he asks me, is he your friend? And I said, he was my friend. And then there was another pause. And my father said, be his friend. And I literally took the phone away from my ear and I looked at it because I could not comprehend what he was saying. He went on and he said, don't perpetuate the hatred. He said, be his friend and maybe you can teach him something. And I thought, if there was ever a person who had a reason to have the harbor hatred and animosity, it was Joe. It was our father. But he was saying, open your heart. So I did. The next day I got together with my friend, Hans. I shared with him our story, my family's story. And at the time there was a movie that had been made, a television movie called Hidden in Silence, and it was on video. So I shared that with him, showed it to him, and then he shared with me his story. It turns out in his family, part of his family were prominent Nazis in a small town in Germany. And he said that he was told that you either run with the wolves or you're eaten by them. I didn't judge. I listened to his story because it was his story, not mine. And after a while, my dad came out to visit, and they got to be really good friends. My dad's all of 5'2", and this guy was like 6'2". So he was this enormous big guy, and my little dad, and they're telling jokes. They got to be fun. We went scuba diving too. My dad didn't dive, but he went on the trips with us. So my friend Hans went back to Germany after a while to work with his father's company. He came back a couple of years later, and we got together for lunch at a little Thai restaurant in Marina del Rey. And he was telling me when he went back in this little town, he said he went back and people just used that kind of language. And he said it was shocking to him because he says, I just grew up with that. And he actually started to tear up a little bit, and he said, your dad and you showed me something different. And I started to tear up, and it was, my dad was right. He asked me to open my heart and listen to him, and it broke the cycle of hatred. That gets me choked up because he was just an incredible guy. I've lost my space. So there was recognition. Fusha and Helena were recognized by Yad Vashem in 1979. Several of the rescued got together and talked to Yad Vashem, and they were honored as righteous Gentiles. Fusha felt the warmth from the Jewish community, from the non-Jewish community. She was appreciated. She got to speak at different schools. She got to share her story. Helena chose to stay in Poland. Helena didn't feel the same kind of warmth as Fusha did all her life. Joe was an oral surgeon. He and Fusha ended up living the American dream. There was a documentary short film made by a gentleman named Cy Rotter from Washington, D.C. About Max and Fusha's story. That was the clip of Max talking about his experience in the train. That was from that film. It was dedicated to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, and it can be viewed there. Fusha got the opportunity to speak at the dedication of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. And that was an incredible honor for her. Here's a girl from the farm among dignitaries. Christina, did you want to share?
Well, one of the things that was really interesting about this whole event was that they had a lot of really important speakers. The president spoke, and that was President Clinton. Then they had the president of Poland, Lech Walesa. They had, I don't remember if it was the president of Israel, the prime minister, but some important person from Israel. And they had, a few other people speaking. And they were all men. And my mother was the only woman that spoke. And her speech was at the end. And when she finished her speech, she got a standing ovation. And she was the only person that got a standing ovation. And I was really surprised because I thought, well, if anybody was going to get a standing ovation, it would be the president. And he gave a nice speech. And then as she was starting to walk off the stage, Mrs. Clinton ran up to her and hugged her. And it appeared spontaneous. So that was really nice that, she got more respect that day than the President of the United States. So I just wanted to throw that in because that was a big deal. That was a very moving moment.
Yeah. And there's Joe right beside her. Joe was always at her side. He always was very supportive of her. And I just wanted to share another picture of that event with you. You could see it was a cold day, and Fusha was cold, so Vice President Al Gore had his arm around her. And take a look at my father's face in the background. He was not very happy about that. He was very protective over Fusha. There was a movie made in the 1990s, Hidden in Silence. Kelly Martin, a young actress, played my mom. She played it very passionately. Denise Alexander produced this movie. It took her 10 years to get this movie produced. She fought for Fuchsia. She fought to have that film, that TV movie, done as good as possible. And Richard Kola directed the movie. Beata Pozniak-Daniels, at the time Beata Pozniak, a Polish actress in the United States who was fighting her way through Hollywood. She had grown up with Women's Day throughout the world, but there was no Women's Day in America. So she pushed through a bill through Congress to have Women's Day become Women's Day USA in the United States. And this lady is, I mean, talk about a powerhouse. She's unstoppable. And together with Fuchsia, another unstoppable young, or she would always say she's a young woman, together these two are like a volcano of energy. A book has recently been published, a fictional novel based on Stefania Fuchsia's experience. It's called The Light in Hidden Places. It's out in Poland. It's under the title of Światło ukryte w mroku. In the UK, it's also The Light in Hidden Places. It's out in will be out in 15 countries. And the audiobook version of it was read by Beata Pozniak-Daniels, a family friend who knew Fuchsia. She honored her years before, and here she has the opportunity to voice Fuchsia in such an incredibly passionate way. It's a remarkable representation of our mother. The house on Tatarska Street, this is how it looked a few years ago. It was purchased by an incredibly wonderful man who, from his own pocket, is making this into a museum. He felt that these girls have to be honored in Przemyśl. They must be honored, and their story has to live on. So it's being turned into a museum. This is how it looked at the end of last year. It's on its way to becoming a museum. Also wanted to share with you a few pictures of Fuchsia in the United States. She was always up for an adventure. Here she is snorkeling with me in La Jolla Cove in San Diego. She was ready to jump on the back of the motorcycle at a moment's notice. And her in that football outfit, that just really shows who she is. She passed away on September 29th, 2018. You know, what's not known about Fuchsia is that she had what we now know as post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. At the time, nobody talked about that. And you didn't go to therapy to get treated. She had to be strong. She had her demons, and her demons would eat her up. She had insomnia. She had terrible insomnia. She was so depressed sometimes. She would cry uncontrollably for no reasons. She literally had flashbacks. She would sometimes say, "I'm in the attic right now." And she would see things. And I was in high school. It would boggle my mind, what's going on with this woman. But I firmly believe that the PTSD started a dementia. She had dementia in her later years. And the dementia is a double-edged sword. It's a terrible, terrible disease. But it actually was a blessing for her because she was able to forget all of that stuff. And she forgot me. She forgot my sister. She forgot everybody. But she forgot the war. And she could go back to being a young teenager. So in her later years, she was happy. She would sing. She sang Polish songs. And she died happy. Christina and I are the stewards of our parents' story. And our job is to keep it alive and keep it inspiring people. It actually has been inspiring people in Przemyśl, in the primary school there. This lady, Monica Lach, a wonderful lady. She teaches history at the school, and she was tasked with that and to teach about the Holocaust. And her daughter, the girl on the right, was doing research and helping her, and she learned about Helena and Fuchsia. And they were right there in that town. And they reached out to me and talked, and I was able to go out to that school and meet them. And the wonderful thing is they put together a skit about Fuchsia and Helena. When I went to visit there were these kids putting on this skit about them. And my daughter, she would put on, I would see her in school, you know, they do these skits about historical figures, and, you know, it's nice to see that. But here are these kids putting on a skit about my mom. So I was proud, I was crying, you know, just all these emotions were going through me. They've since taken that skit on the road, and they now do the skit at the Belzec Museum once a year on Holocaust Remembrance Day. This was just this past March, on Holocaust Remembrance Day, when they did the skit. Pusha's story is one of compassion, it's one of tolerance, it's one of courage. Pusha's courage was not overt. She didn't stand up and say, I'm going to fight the Nazi regime, I'm going to stand up to him. She quietly did that. She was silent in her courage. And one of her favorite songs was, I'll play a short clip of it. It's a Polish song. It's called Silent Waters, Tear Up the Shore.
Cicha woda, brzegi rwie, nie wiesz nawet jak i gdzie, nie zdążysz nawet zabezpieczyć się, bo nie zna nikt metody, by się ustrzec cichej wody.
It was one of her favorite songs. We started a foundation to keep inspiring and touching people. The foundation is called the Steffi Foundation, and it inspires the belief. Pusha and Helena are both examples that one thought, one act, one person can change the world. And our goal at the foundation is to include Stefania and Helena's story in school curricula throughout the globe and inspire people, particularly inspiring young people, that they matter, that they can make a difference, that taking an action, they matter and they can change the world.